Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hey,
Aloha.
happy Sunday. ah, take your time to see everybody. Huh. Wow. Wow. Yay. It's wonderful. So let your attention connect with your body in the sitting posture itself. And sometimes letting the attention it's like a light sprinkle of attention, like a light sprinkle of rain is coming, with the attention kind of sprinkle down into your sitting posture. And sometimes it's just enough to know we're sitting. Sometimes letting the attention start to settle in with hearing as we connect with the sitting posture. As a way to also find an abiding of attention that doesn't have such a wall between a sense of inside, outside. So we can be aware of the sensations, the physical sensations on our skin. There's the word skin as a sense of like a wall or barrier. But there are many holes in that skin. Many countless sensations on the surface of our bodies. And so as we let the attention shift from the sitting posture to hearing, we don't have to leave our body. We just can be aware of hearing. Through the ear doors, the holes there. Sometimes our skin picks up the vibration of hearing as well. It's like the ear and skin are like a drum, picks up the vibration and textures of sounds. And it can be actually interesting or even fun to explore and see as sounds are appearing and disappearing, how connected we can be with that, the movement of that. The immediacy of sounds or the beginning, middle, ends of sounds. We can bring great care and kindness to the sensitivity of the ear door to pick up the speed of sound. The sensitivity of our skin. And the nuances of what we call silence, often a texture itself. So letting the kindness, the care, the tenderness sink into the ears, our skin. Just like a soft rain. Soaking gradually or immersing gradually the sensations, physical sensations and sounds. So within that awareness of sitting posture, there can be abiding in this field of awareness of textures and vibrations coming and going by themselves without having to fix or manipulate or control, but to just let them appear, live, and disappear just as they are. That field of awareness, the abiding, can be infused with care, tenderness, or kindness. Sometimes the attention can settle in a little more, grounding with earth element within the hands. Just a word, Hands are just a word for that sensitivity of touch. And we just check to see, can we receive? Is there a receptive awareness within this field of abiding? Just letting the attention drop in, relaxing into the hand. The heaviness, the hardness, the pressure can be grounding. Contrasting that with receiving the movement of the breath within your belly, abdomen, the lightness of air, the movement of air. We check to see, can we be with that movement just as it's happening? Letting it be shallow if it's shallow, or deep, long or short. Letting it be just as it is. We never can put words on what the experience of breath is. It's always new. We can try, but it's not the direct experience. With this, within this abiding in this grounded, receptive field of awareness, when thoughts or emotions appear and live and disappear, there is that same instruction. No need to fix, get rid of, get, manipulate. But we check to see, can we drop into this experience like we do with our hands, our sounds, our belly? No need to figure things out through the thought process. Just letting these thoughts and emotions come and go just as they are. Immersed in kindness and care. As they drift through like clouds passing through the sky.
Hello, everybody. Good to sit with you all. Let's take another quick look around. Um, so I thought I'd, offer a few words today. I just got back a few days ago from a trip to South Dakota, where I um, go to support some friends of mine, some family, in their Sundance ceremony on the Pine Ridge Reservation out there. I've gone a bunch of years. I haven't, it's been a few years, of course, since COVID and stuff. But um, but even so, I don't get to go every year anymore. I think since moving out to Hawaii, it's a bigger trip, to get out there. But it's always beautiful and very powerful, moving experience. And I think the what I kind of want to offer today a little bit about sort of coming from there is just something I'm really sitting with about the power and importance of spiritual work, especially like shared spiritual work. I think that sometimes we can forget how much work goes into um, like preparing the ground for our meditation practice, our spiritual practice, which can there are times where it can feel very immaterial. It's about the mind ultimately, and our practice, and especially in these days of COVID where we're supporting people so online, and we're not as in person. That there's a way in which it can feel sort of like disembodied and unmaterial, immaterial. Even though, of course, and I'll say more about this, that there's something about our self retreats at home, where we are also, realizing the responsibility we each have for our material um, conditions of our retreats, or our time sitting on Sundays or what have you. So it's not like we've sometimes the reminders of that can be actually more pronounced than sometimes we go off to a meditation retreat and everything's sort of mostly taken care of for us. Um, the the Sundance is like really like of the many powerful things about it is it's a very kind of collective um, creation in terms of the work that goes into it. The ceremony itself is formally 4 days, but there's a official 4 days before that of what's called purification, but um, it's kind of internal purification in preparation of the ceremony itself. But that is almost entirely built on work, on the physical requirements of you know having a space where several hundred people can either support or participate in kind of various ways. And so just like before the ceremony even starts, there's so much to do. You know, just days of digging latrines and uh, for the outhouses, and prepping all kinds of kind of ceremonial stuff. For individual dancers, but also for collective stuff. For the arbor space that the ceremony takes place in is um, boundaried by there's like 405 of these little sticks that need to get painted and tobacco ties put on each of them. And um, there's but the tree that's danced around needs to be from last year removed, and then the hole dug. It's talking like a 10-foot hole, maybe 4 feet, 5 feet wide. It takes a lot of effort, and then getting the new tree for the year and going to cut it down and bringing it back. Um, and then everyone has their own campsites. So there's a lot of work of just like your own campsite and getting the kitchen going and getting your tents up and putting up tons of teepees and things that much of it can't really be done alone. It really requires a lot of group effort and coordination. There's a big communal kitchen that opens up during the ceremony so that people who arrive, don't need to have their own kitchens, that they can go get food there. And so it's just like tons of work, and it's very joyful work. It's very hard work. You're in very rugged conditions. It's a long drive on a dusty road to get to a shower, and there's several hundred other people probably who are wanting to take a shower there, and getting just getting ice, for the coolers is like a huge deal, right? Getting to a shop in town, and you're exposed to the elements. You're camping, so that there's these summer storms come through that region, and they're very windy and powerful thunderstorms and rain and all kinds of mid-level calamities are kind of happening that require require a team effort to get your stuff pulled out of a collapsed tent and hang up to dry and stuff like that. So something very powerful about that and beautiful about it. The sense of shared work and shared goal, shared vision, shared values, around creating the space for people to pray, and to be able to have their time every year where they can, renew their commitments and their sacrifice. And it's really amazing. And it's also amazing that the sense of it's also not like a place of necessarily shared views. Like doing work together doesn't mean you have to like agree on whatever your opinions of anything in particular. I was working with this one woman, and I don't know how this conversation kind of veered off into whatever, and this whole thing about she's like, yeah, well, like everyone thinks Putin's such a bad guy, but really, he's like destroyed the Illuminati center in Ukraine, and there's like this huge underground system of bunkers from the Vatican that they're holding prisoner children. And I was just like, oh, like I was like, that's totally crazy as far as I'm concerned, and like let's just keep digging this hole or whatever. There was no sense that like we had to agree on like whatever. And there's some relief in that, of like I can. I don't know. I do think there's so much about shared space and what we think of as community, so much in various parts of the world or various spiritual or organizational or ethnic cultures. It's like community implies something about like shared views or shared perspectives, and it's kind of a relief to be in a place where that's not necessarily the case, and you can have a sense of solidarity and camaraderie with people who you might have very different views from, and you're careful about all of where that goes. But there's maybe a little bit more baseline of like patience with people and being willing to kind of listen to things that might not be so extreme as maybe that person, but other things where it's like, oh, but it's in a sort of space of goodwill and shared work and exhaustion that sometimes I think leads to a little bit of sense of spaciousness in our hearts, for one another. And then there's all this work that has to happen during the ceremony, of course, and then this like when it's over, there's a lot of work to do packing up, and that's always just like interesting too of like who really sticks around, for that part of it, and who comes early, and who stays late, and who just shows up for the sort of like the sweet meat, kind of in the middle. And there's actually no judgment or requisite, you know. I mean, it's understood that not everyone, you know, it's hard to take 4 days off and get out there, and never mind 8 days or 10 days if you're really kind of trying to be the super supporter, you know. And I've played all those roles at times of kind of just showing up to help during the ceremony, and times where I really take a bigger chunk of time out to help. And it always feels better to ride it through to the end, you know, just to see everybody leave and everything has to come down. And um, that sense of how do you integrate the kind of purity of the experience, of the sort of spiritual heights and intensity with the mundane pieces of, like, you know, filling up the, you know, the holes, and putting all the buffalo skulls away, and all the, you know, just the kind of mundane work of closing up, you know, a ceremony. And and again, where is that individual work and individually important, and where is it shared? And I think that we all, you know, it's just interesting because you sort of see different lineages and traditions. And in some ways, actually, some of our at home retreats encourage a little more of that integration, maybe, than some of the retreats where we go off to somewhere kind of maybe more exotic. And you know, end of the retreat comes, and maybe you have a closing day with a yogi job and you have to pack up your stuff, but then you're gone, you know. And there's like a clean cut maybe from that space. And that's fine. And most places don't want you hanging around, like, you know, offering to help or whatever. Some places do. um, but I think there is a way that, you know, we've all experienced over the last couple of years, this sense of, you know, that last Zoom on Sunday evening or whatever, and then it's like, oh, you still have to go make dinner or clean up, or the next day you wake up in the same bed. And there's a sense of the continuity, you know, and of the integration of the depths of spiritual practice with the more mundane material necessities, you know, of supporting ourselves, and of supporting the space that we create, you know, for ourselves. So that, you know, you're most people, I think, to some degree, it's like, oh, you have a sitting space in your home, maybe more consistently than you did a few years ago. You know, maybe there's a way in which it's like, oh, if you're coming on the Sunday sittings or you're coming to Zoom sessions, there's a way in which your altar or something is taking up a little bit more integrated space in your home. Um, and that there is a way that it's like practicing in our homes. We learn to cook and sweep and clean and just deal with like whatever issues arise, you know, that feel like they're in the way, you know, maybe of our mindfulness practice. Um, but that we, you know, ultimately come to see them as places where we can really practice, you know, very deeply, and especially in the container of more protection and more quietude, that these things arise, and we see that there's a way to relate to them differently than we may, you know, just in our daily lives, far outside of retreat or far outside of the context of the container. And there is something about, you know, it's like even this, it's like a lot of people are traveling to get there or not necessarily seeing one another in daily life, you know. And I think we have some sort of similar interesting kind of dynamic of what is the nature, you know, sometimes you can question, like, what is the nature of our kind of connection as a community when we're not really engaged much with each other outside of the context of these Zoom sessions. And um, uh, and that sense of like, oh, it's still really meaningful to come together, you know, once a year with folks, and to get to know people in a really different context. And you know, we all know that to some degree if you've been on an in-person retreat ever. You know, there is this, like, it's like, yeah, people who you only see when you go on retreat, and you may have really not exchanged much of your life with them or their life with yours, but there's some way in which you know them and that they provide a kind of like piece of the security for you. Even if they're annoying you as yogis, the way they sneeze or shuffle around or whatever it might be, the sense of like solidarity and of Sangha, of that they're a part of this something that feels reassuring and stable and reinforcing and that we come back to. Um, and then, of course, as yogis, there might not be a lot of spiritual work that we're doing together in terms of manual labor and material effort. But there is that sense of course, we appreciate and acknowledge the spiritual work of vipassana, sitting together and sharing that space, and that there is something very hard to describe that we do gain and gather and generate, right, for ourselves and for each other in that silence and in that that sacred space. How important that is, and to recognize this way in which it's like community isn't just granted, and the sacred space isn't just granted. There's a level in which it is granted, and we can just pop in and we can just show up, and like that is an essential part of the offering, that it's like it needs to be that flexible, depending on the conditions of your life and what people can afford in terms of time and money and responsibilities to be giving, to our shared space. Um, and there is that sense of like, there is an understanding that the more you offer, the more you give, the more you show up, the more you work, whatever that looks like, right? And in our context, that the more you also benefit, right? The more it's like we are also generating the space, we are generating the community, we're generating the bonds um, of of connection and of responsibility that we also benefit from, and that others benefit from. This uh, sense of sangha, of community, of home, how important that is for us, and how dependent it really is upon us. At the very least, showing up, and we all get that sense of like, oh, you see the familiar faces on Sundays, or you see new faces, and you start to notice maybe when someone isn't around or people aren't there, and there is a sense of presence, and the the generative work and result of that is something that we take part in, we relish, we acknowledge. And of course, in the hardship sometimes, especially when we're more in intensive retreat and going through difficult times, um, the Q&A sessions, or I know this last winter we did, or this last retreat, there were a few um, group interviews. There is something good about that, of like little kind of war stories, and it's like you realize you're not the only one who's going through some challenges and difficult times. And even coming back, I was one of these people who had travel dukkha, with flights and delays and exploding airplanes and everything. And I don't know if it made it worth it, but there was like, you really go through like moves like 36 hours of stuff with the same group of people, on this plane and various planes and switching. There's some kind of joy that that comes through that shared experience, and you break through some uh the sort of normal reserve maybe of what those kind of like travel relationships look like, of, oh, you're just sitting next to someone, or you kind of ignore them, or you notice but you don't engage, and at some point that breaks down into something that feels a little more like real relationship and connection and learning about people. And um, plenty of that out there. It's like the sense of these relationships built upon on work, and on shared experience. And yeah, whether it's the storm and the camp next door is, a lot of more elderly folks, and they really need help, you know, getting their tents back up and washing everything out. It's like the calamities are also a time where it's an opportunity to connect and learn and meet people, and understand and help, the sense of like, oh, it's where the things are torn. There's that sense of being able to create what generates the healing, and that there's so much goodness in that, so much power. And it's hard. I think we're in an interesting point as an organization, as a community, ourselves around what are we doing to keep making kind of fostering that possibility. Before COVID, it was mostly the Honolulu Sangha that was engaged in this kind of spiritual work, which you might call, right, of helping get our in-person retreats going and managing them and dealing with the various spaces that we rent over on Oahu, and getting the kitchen set up and getting the cooks and the cleaners and the yogis organized. And it's a big part of that sangha has always been the work of sangha, right? The work of generating and of generating and creating and protecting the spaces in which we practice, just like any spiritual work. And they're a model of patience and goodwill and all these good things. No conflicts. Um, but since COVID, of course, it's like very different, right? So that those in-person retreats aren't happening, and most of our stuff is our but then on the other hand, the sense of sangha and sense of community has like deepened in this other way, where people who we maybe only were seeing once a year, if that, we're seeing very frequently and are seeing each other very frequently, and how wonderful that is. And it's limited, there's not a lot of work. The work that this requires is sort of technical, right, in terms of the Zoom stuff or in terms of our website and the Oriana platform. And it's not necessarily something that kind of can easily be sort of delegated. And um, but people have mentioned the sense of like, wanting now that there's more sense of who people are, and their dogs and cats and and all that. Where is there a little more meat to the kind of relationship? And so it's something we are sort of thinking about and considering. And I think this experience of mine has helped me realize like my aspiration would be that it's at least at this stage it's framed around work. That this sense of like, yeah, how, people who want to help and people who want to be more involved, like what does that look like, and what are things that can be shared and can be taken up by other group of people. So and to know that it's not required. It's not like we're going to put everybody on duty, and assign you your toilet cleaning or whatever, obligations. And people help already in all kinds of ways. Part of what inspired me too is just this app that we had developed, and seeing it's like, okay, there were a couple of people who wanted to help, like take all these recordings that we've had and turn them into edit them and clean them up so that we could, upload them to this app. And, that's been wonderful. It's been really great in this sense of like, okay, there's probably more things like that. There's probably more things where I could use a little help with X or Y. So, um, not as a matter of pressure, because we also like, just like I was saying about the Sundance, it's like, we know not everyone has time or energy or, doesn't necessarily have a skill set that we, can make use of right now. Um, and we want people to feel like this is a refuge and safe and easy, and not like a high threshold of um, uh, effort or responsibility to come participate and to take shelter in this thing that we're creating. But we also know that there are people who do have time and energy and interests and skills and things that they want to be able to contribute, and we want to make sure that we have some way of enabling that and creating some more opportunities for that. So we'll see. I think it'd be interesting to see if we can use some of this technology to figure out, well, what are the skills people have and might want to share, and what are our needs, and how do we sort of coordinate some of that. So um, keep your eyes peeled for for all of for whatever opportunities may arise. Because it's something that I just so value, and it is ultimately such a part of this practice, of understanding our responsibility for generating the the conditions of our practice and of our mind that help lead to insight and the purification of our being and who we are, and that sense of responsibility is internal, but it's also shared, and the sense of work is understood, that it's a spiritual work to sit down and try to observe and try to be tender and try to understand what's happening. And that there is material work, and that relationships that are developed around shared work, around um, sacred things, sacred projects, around even the mundane aspect of the sacred, is important, and really strengthening and beautiful. Um, and part of this sense of, like, how do we create, what do we mean by Sangha? What do we mean by spiritual home? And I think that we can have all kinds of relationships to this question of a spiritual home. Sometimes there is that place where it's like we just need a refuge, and we need that sense of security, and the the generosity of just kind of receiving it, and the sense of safety in that. But it is interesting too. I was thinking about the word vihara. We talk about the Brahma viharas, the divine abodes, divine abidings. That word vihara also is kind of used a lot, to mean like monastery. If you just go to India, the um, supposedly, the Burmese vihara, or these different, they're monasteries or meditation centers, and those are a little bit of like later meaning of that word. And so I was looking up that word in the Pali dictionary, and it says, so vihara, spending one's time, sojourning or walking about, staying in place, a living, place of living, an abode in general. But like, um, Eka Vihara is living by oneself. Janga Vihara is wandering on foot. Uh, Diwa Vihara, passing the time of day. So it has this other meaning of like the kind of like a state of life, the condition, a mode of life, a way of life. And I think it's important to get that it's like, right, because these monks and nuns in the day, it's like this focus on homelessness was big, right? That they have left the home life and they have gone into the wandering life. And yet on the other hand, this value of the vihara, of the abiding, whether it's the monastery, or the days abiding at the foot of a tree, or the Brahma Viharas, of like the abiding that we create in these beautiful qualities of mind. There's something in that word as different than home, that has this internal sense of kind of dexterity, right? That it's not just this sort of anchor and stability of home and sanctuary that's permanent, or the perception of permanence, but that this idea of the vihara as a way of life, as a way of being, as a condition, um, it's in tune with the impermanence of it, and it's in tune with the dynamism of it, and the responsibility we have for creating it, right? The divine abodes of loving kindness, of compassion, of appreciative joy, of equanimity, the decision to abide for a day or an afternoon practicing, or this idea of our home as a vihara. uh, you can see that there's a much more kind of bigger range of that doesn't unplug us from responsibility, and this sense of like that we are needing to generate it, that there is a generative responsibility for that in all of us, is such an important part of this practice. Yes, of course, there are going to be times where we emphasize the effortlessness of things, and the letting go, and the stopping of forcing, and the the mental qualities of agitation that lead towards the tendency to generate or construct. So, yes, there are places of paradox and tension in there, but ultimately the sense of like, oh yeah, where do we understand that we are part of creating this vihara for ourselves, for our sangha, for one another, and that it is real work, right? To validate that as real work, and sometimes we're up for it, sometimes we're not. I remember some retreat this sometime in the last year. Someone, I can't remember who it was saying how they were getting ready to go on retreat and self retreat with us online, and one of their friends was going to bring them dinner every day, to help support them. You know, and I was like, wow, that's awesome. Like who has that? Like, who really gets that level of like support, and how nice would that be to have someone bring you dinner every night while you're a yogi because they value it and they appreciate it and they want to support you. And it's like, well, that is how it is in Burma, right? And it's how it is over, like at Sundance. It's like people are putting in this effort, and we're not there yet, not as a kind of community in ourselves, and not there yet in terms of Western Dharma, Western Buddhism. um, it's hard, I'll get these emails once in a while of like, oh, X and so monk from X and so place is coming to Hawaii, and can your folks help take care of him for a little while? And it's like, no, we really can't. Like the sense of like, first of all, a lot of monks and nuns don't know how much work it is to take care of a monk or a nun for a while, because it's like there's a lot of rules, and you always have to eat, before noon, and it's like a production, and there's been one time where it kind of worked out a little bit, or there was a monk on another part of the island, and we offered one meal, or you can kind of like piece it together. Money is easier sometimes, right, than actual like effort, human labor. It's like, well, we'll sponsor a meal, right? And of course that's everywhere as well. um, but it's very hard, and there is something poignant in that, very poignant, of like, we're so invested and indebted to our monastics, in our tradition. And when we go to Burma, of course, there's like ways that we can support them more directly, and be involved in that. But it's humbling to see that it's like, oh, we really don't have the community resource to actually like take care of a monastic for any considerable period of time, if they're in the area. And it is a litmus test a little bit of like the sort of maturity of a of a Buddhist sangha, right? Of being able to sort of like take that on or not. Um, One paradigm, right? And there's something meaningful in it. And so there is that sense of like, hey, we're not there, and but what are the ways that maybe we start to see where our efforts and our endeavoring can help? And of course, people do donate money, and people do donate in all kinds of ways that is like deeply important, and that we use, and that are really foundational, that allow us to do this. From, people give specific donations for the land, or um, for just operational support. A lot of times when people register for the retreats, they give that additional, donation. And so of course that's like, it gives a sense of sort of flexibility and dexterity, that it's like, okay, we can help kind of maintain certain things and provide scholarships and stuff like that. So we want to keep making sure that we use all forms of that, but are also want to make sure that we're including whatever energy is out there and whatever inspiration is out there to um, to be able to utilize that to help build the strength of the sangha, build the strength of the community. And then of course for each of us, understanding the ways that it builds our own sense of dedication and um, and goodness, right? That karma is work, right? Karma is not just something kind of mystical. It has that meaning, but it also just has the meaning of work, action, and that this sense of what is c- collective spiritual karma, work, activity, action, that we share, that we rejoice in, and that we receive. Whether we're able to sort of offer it or not, the sense of the goodness of it is shared freely with all, and that we are all equally enfranchised in the goodness that gets generated. It's so important to remember that. I think that's it for today. And yeah, we'll see over the next weeks and months if there's some way we might start to put out to folks of ways you can get more involved in some of the work that we're doing. So we have time for questions about your practice, about the instructions. I know my talk wasn't very meditation instruction-y, but if you have questions about the talk, of course, yeah, whatever way we can support, we have some time for that. Catalina, let's see. Oh, wait, hold on. I have to let you unmute. Here we go. Okay, now you can. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Jesse. So nice to see you, and thank you for your teachings. I wanted to ask you. You helped me a lot, like several years ago, when I was going through a friendship that have the exclusive of a friend who was so demanding and so so demanding that overwhelmed me totally. And so I was able to get off of that friendship. But at the same time, I feel that there was not a conclusion, and I feel that I hurt my friend a lot close in that relationship. And I don't want to hurt. I don't want that. So I'm trying to tell her that we can get together again. But I'm very afraid because of her demands producing me rejection. It produced on me like, so I wanted to your advice about that.
Yeah, sure. I can start, and then Michelle, if you have more to offer. I remember that very clearly. Yeah, I mean, so first of all, I mean, I think that just the fact that you're able to create that boundary and to keep it a firm boundary at first is the hardest thing, and wonderful that you're able to do it. And so I think, because of the nature of sort of what you were describing, it's very hard at a certain place to be like, just sort of have a soft boundary and, well, maybe we'll just change this or this. It's like it really needed to be sort of total in order for you to feel like you got the space. But that then there's this question of sort of unresolved. And I think this, so I don't, there's so many ways to go with it, but I think it's good that some good time has gone by, right? It's been a year, 2 years, right, since it's or longer. So in one way, it's like, okay, you've gotten a little bit disentangled from some of the entanglements that are so hard to kind of get out of, and that I think it's very beautiful to try to do what you're saying, right? To say, okay, now that I have some space, is there a way that I can go back in and feel like I can be healthy and protect myself, not be, abused, and not be willing to sort of subject myself to something that is unhealthy for me. But you don't know, maybe she has changed, or maybe there's, you have to give the sense of giving people a little bit of sense of possibility that something might have shifted. I think to be careful is very important, to say it's like, okay, getting together once, just to see what it's like, with no sense that has to go on or be more of a commitment than that, and just seeing, that of course your guard is still going to be up, on some degree, just to see. And then to be willing to say, okay, maybe it's another 2 years that have to go by, or maybe in a few months there's like something happening and it makes sense so you guys can go together to whatever, like maybe there's a way that see someone who can be back in your life. Maybe you're not even wanting that, and it sounds like maybe you're just wanting to resolve, you just want it to be like a little cleaner ending. And I often think that's a little bit of a sign of a person, your friend, who's never going to let there be a clean ending. I mean, that might not be true, but there's a way in which it's like sometimes it's like it get things get so heated and you have to be so forceful to create the boundary because there's no soft way to do it, that then there's a way in which it's like it doesn't feel good. You don't want to be mean, but it's something that isn't generated by you. It's like the conditions are there that require that level of sort of severity and intensity. And if that is something that they're kind of holding over you as a way to stay connected, right? As a way of still keeping you a little bit in the thread of things, it's just sometimes like a personality tendency that is going to be very deep for them and hard to stop, unless they're really like getting work and doing their own work to sort of see their own patterns or whatever. It's going to be something that they realize works. It's a way to keep you hooked in and feeling guilty because you're susceptible to it. So I think it's like, I don't know, that this is based more on like our past conversation. I think it's worth giving it the trying, because it's like, yeah, you don't want to be mean, you don't want to have to feel like you've hurt someone, but I think that also says more maybe about you and than it does about what you've actually done. Like, have you actually hurt this person, or have you protected yourself? And where is that line between sense of like, actually, I care enough about myself that I'm not going to hurt me? Why do we interpret that as hurting someone else? Right? That is it's our own personality complexities, that sometimes you just need to be careful with and see and understand. But I think it's always worth, trying to kind of resolve and not leave things on bad terms. I don't, I also, it's like, it bothers you, it's sort of just there in the background, and you want something to be healed, and you can try. I think it's great that you have give the space, but, to be open to the chance that it's going to happen, but also open to the possibility that it's, she may not have grown or changed in a way that's going to make that possible. I don't know, Michelle. Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me? You can hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful that you could be brave to do that, to set a boundary. And I think a good question is really for all of us, like everybody sitting here right now. What does it feel like when somebody sets a boundary with us? And because I think that it's always good to see why it's hard to set a boundary, right? And why, because often when we get a boundary, a no of some sort, it doesn't usually feel like, oh boy. It doesn't usually feel that good for any of us as a human being. As a human being, I don't think most of us would put it in the pleasant category of feeling. But I think that where it's interesting to look is who gets to be in charge. Like, who's in charge? Is it we don't set the boundary because we're afraid somebody will be disappointed, or right, or have aversion. And I think that this is, or we have guilt or fear from setting the boundary. We don't want the disappointment to be in charge, right? We don't want the aversion to be in charge. We want the wisdom, the metta for yourself or the metta for others to be in charge. And actually, we can't control. If we have come to the place where we need to set a boundary, and we do that with care and compassion, then we have to give the person responsibility to deal with it, whatever reaction they have, right? Because it's like it's okay for people to feel disappointment, because otherwise we're all held hostage to the aversion to disappointment. We're all held hostage. It's oppressive. There's no freedom. But I think that at least at least how I was raised, I didn't have the right to set a boundary, right? I didn't even, not even the right. It was not okay. So to get to that place where there's enough self-worth, right? And enough metta and wisdom. And I think of self-worth as actually can lead to a real genuine humility with all this. Like there's a genuine humility with setting boundaries, knowing in the human world it's not most of us have not been taught how to do it well. Most of us have not been taught how to receive it well, right? We have to keep exploring how we feel when it happens to us. And for some people, it's intolerable. For some people, they actually can't handle the experience of being told no. They really have a hard time, and they're the most difficult to set a boundary with, right? Like, and it's all learning how that works, like how to bring care. And then usually with people that really can't tolerate it, you have to have more distance from, right? Because you can't have a real relationship. So you're really in the place where you're getting a greater relationship with yourself on all this, right? You're getting a better relationship of trust with yourself, that you can not collapse in the face of it, right? Not get so afraid of hurting someone, because really you're not hurting someone at all. You're trying to, right? You're trying to protect yourself, and then from their demand, right? Which the demand is too much. That's hurting you. So it's again, the human world is messy. It's not, this stuff is not easy, especially if you really were trained not to do it, you know. And it's like you've done it, you know, it's like you've done it, you know, you're strengthened by this. But then it's not over in life. It's like then we'll get another opportunity and another opportunity, you know. It's like, I mean, it's not just humans. I gotta say, my yard is a complete, total jungle. You know, it's like the rooster has gotten totally out of control with eating the cat food. And you know, it's like the boundaries are, you know, wanting to have compassionate compassionate boundaries. But sometimes I go out there and I'm like, get get out of here already, right? Like, it's like, come on, you know. So it's, do you see what I mean? It's like this way that we're all set up, like the mice and the rats and the cats and the roosters and the chickens and the geckos and the centipedes and the humans, right? We're all doing this thing. Obviously, the world is in a bit of a mess because nobody knows how to set boundaries in the human world. That's the problem. That's the war. You've hit the jackpot with the question. Really.
Yeah, good luck. It'll be interesting to hear how it goes. Yeah. And maybe it'll just be simple. Maybe it'll be like you have a conversation, you explain, she understands, and it's all tidy, you know? And that definitely happens.
Yeah, I will try.
Yeah. Luca.
Hello, thank you for the guidance today. I usually feel comfortable asking questions. I'm feeling very anxious right now. There's a thing that happens in my in practice that happened today. I'll get anxious. I get tight in the chest, forehead, temples, jaw, unpleasant sense that something's wrong. Sort of narrow attention. racing thoughts. And I have this sense that like, oh, I need to like if I could just like put my finger on what was happening, then it would stop. I would at least see what's going on. And I have the sense that feeling that I'm supposed to. And in fact, that's what you all want me to do. And that my not being able to do that is a failure. And then, it's like, oh, there's some breaths. And then rumination. And then, oh, I felt my fingers for a little bit. And at one point, it's like, oh, this isn't soft or gentle or tender, or that might be nice. No, part of me wants you to just say, no, you don't need to. And I think this is what you will say. You don't need to figure this out. And maybe actually don't worry about figuring it out. Have a nice relationship with it. I just, so I don't even know there's a question here. This happens. And can you talk to me about it?
How do you want me to go first, Jesse, or do you? I you really can't stop how things are appearing. It's like that's the Vipassana practice is just like sometimes we can find anchors away from something painful or actually pleasant, right? That we can find anchors that are more neutral away from it, and maybe it's like a little pit stop. Like maybe they're just little pit stops, like you described, but those are big. Those are like climbing a mountain and getting a perspective, even if it's for a few seconds. It's like, again, climbing a mountain and getting a bigger perspective. But sometimes it happens in life where anxiety happens, and it's happening from a certain thought pattern that's happening, that's repeating and repeating. And there's basically aversion. Right? It's like we don't want it. It's like we don't want it to keep repeating. We don't, it's like if it's not like an external event or what somebody says or something you need to do or take care of, if it's not that, it's often maybe a deeper internal thing that is like triggering a kind of anxiety thought pattern. But I think I think this is a much longer type of question to answer, because it's something, again, we all humanly deal with, which is anxiety is usually around wanting less unpleasant. It's wanting more control. It's wanting to be able to control what we can't control. And it's ultimately learning how to totally know that anxiety is okay. Like anxiety is totally okay. The more we can drop into the whole body and feel it and not get worried about the external thoughts, like I'm trying to say this clearly enough. It's like we focused on the object of the anxiety, which is the object of the thoughts we're having, but actually that's just stirs up the anxiety more, right? It's like we keep getting caught in the content, but actually, if there's any hope, it's like holding your nose and dropping into the actual experience of the anxiety, because of course you know the answer, Luca, you've heard us say it a million times, but it's like always good to hear it again. It's the resistance to the experience that's so painful. When you finally go, oh, fear's okay, oh, anxiety's okay, and you let yourself experience it, it doesn't make it pleasant. It doesn't make it pleasant, but it makes it bearable and workable and actually stronger. And if that's not happening, if after a certain point whatever you're doing isn't happening, I think it's often better to get out of that groove in whatever way you can. It's like unplug, like even if you have to get up from sitting and go do something else, or I can go through a lot more less drastic approaches. But I believe in taking the record needle off the record, right? I believe in taking it off. If you can't stop it and you're just reinforcing, we're not reinforcing aversion, we're reinforcing a resistance to it. And of course, metta, metta and fear, metta and aversion, compassion, that's the antidote. So I recommend anything you can do to, because I hear the doubt, and the doubt is the beginning of the self-hatred around it, and feeling like you're not doing it right, or you're doing it right. You just can't get rid of it.
Yeah, I think there's some sense of like some external standard I'm supposed to be meeting, right? As opposed to like, no, this is just what's happening.
Here. Again, we're all like, we think we should be much more perfect than we are. We're just, we're just, especially when you get older and you've been practicing a long time, what's left? This stuff, right? It's like, what creates the doubt? It's like not doing it perfectly. It's really, I'm laughing because we have to all get it so bad it's funny. I hope you get that. That's what I mean.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you sound like you get it. You're just getting tired of it,
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Yes.
Change the channel enough. It's not who you are. It's just not who you are. If it becomes such a identity that it's dragging you down into the quicksand, I believe in doing anything to get out. Really.
Yeah.
I think I do. I just want to, there's the, I think Michelle probably already said all of this, but I'll just quickly like, it's also not wrong that if your practice was better, this wouldn't be happening. I mean, that's true for all of us, right? Like, yes, if we were fully enlightened, like we probably wouldn't be in a lot of the torment that we find ourselves in. So there's some truth to that. It's like, but it's not like that. The reality is right now, the mindfulness is not strong enough to be able to show up for this, or the concentration, or the equanimity, or all of these factors, right, that we're aware of. The conditions are not there right now to show up for whatever this thing is, right? Anxiety, aversion, and so that maybe there's like, what I'm trying to say is your initial thing is also true, that yes, if we see it clearly, something can unhook us from it, definitely. But there are just these times where the conditions are not there to see it clearly, and there's nothing you're going to do to make it happen. And the more wound up you get about it, is definitely not going to help, right? And so then you kind of go to everything that Michelle just said, is like, okay, the conditions of the mind are not perfect to show up for this right now. So then what? Then you negotiate and you dance and you try to be skillful in all the ways that we can be. And that ends up being the deeper truth that Michelle also just said, which is that like the deeper freedom of being okay with no matter what's happening, even the unpleasant things, even our own neuroses, even whatever, right? That ultimately it's not about getting rid of all of them. And that is a harder truth to really reckon with and validate internally, but when we have glimpses of it and we see it, it's fundamentally powerful. And then just finally, it's like that last thing about you're tired of it, that's important for all of us to get to accept that we wish it was different, right? To really get that, like, we're tired of this some of these patterns, and we're tired of the mind being the way it is, and that is necessary in terms of the process of liberation and renunciation and disenchantment. That it's like this sense of weariness and like not wanting to perpetuate it. It's a fine line between feeling sort of like disheartened by it and disenchanted, right? And so the disenchanted is the healthy side of it, and the disheartened is the sort of spiraling side of it. But to not forget that, like, you have to, again, like Michele was saying, it's like the more mature our practices, the better, quote unquote, our practices, the more sensitive we are to all these places that are still stuck. So we might say it as like, how long have I been doing this? And I'm still blah, 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 versus like, you might not even notice all the places where your mind is actually much more sort of flexible and dexterous. But these places where we're stuck are more painful because we're more aware of them and we feel them more purely and we see them more clearly. And so that's not to confuse that with like not making progress or not seeing clearly, but actually that the pain of our limitations or the pain of our stuckness can be greater, right? The more sort of mature our practice is, and that is really supposed to be a motivator, of like, okay, now you're seeing clearly, like you're seeing what you can't see and what's hard to see, and that's wonderful. And it's now we have a sense of like, okay, what is our work, and where and what kind of energy then do we bring to some of these places.
Always both helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I told the story, but I'm going to repeat it because I think it's so important. But some months ago was down by a national park nearby, and there were a lot of families around. It's a camping area, and there's a lot of families around, and sidewalks where young children tend to skateboard. But it's a little tricky because it's also a place where people walk along, and so this this was an area where there were a lot of tents and a lot of families, and this young boy lost control of his skateboard going downhill, and he was just getting more and more out of control and faster, and he came like a millimeter from hitting somebody, and it was very intense. And his grandmother, which was really fun also to watch, his grandmother came running over like she was going to put herself in between the skateboard and this kid was going to hit. And it was so interesting. It's like this kid he just braked that skateboard like so hard. I don't know, luckily he wasn't barefoot. That's all I can say, because he would have taken the bottom of his foot off, but he just braked that thing, and he just went like, again, it just almost hit this person. And you could feel the tension of aversion, like this tension of aversion or rage or fear, this atmosphere. And his grandmother just said before any of that energy could hit him, it was almost like she got in between and protected him, and she said, "Good breaking. Good breaking." And I was like, wow, I wish she was around when I was a kid. Like, man, wow, like what a great thing she did. It wasn't like he wasn't going to get in trouble. I mean, he had a lot of family to reckon with that we're not going to be like that, but that she noticed that he did it. She focused on the achievement, that he actually did stop and he didn't hurt anybody. He did break. And I do think we need more of a coach inside like that, that we grasp how many times we are succeeding, that we grasp that we didn't say that. Oh, and even though we're thinking it, we didn't say that. We did delete the email that we wanted to send, right? But didn't, right? Just that sense of how many times we are restraining ourselves, how many times we are doing metta, like all the ways we are succeeding, we're not really good at giving ourselves credit for. And I think that it's so important, the sense of the chronic perfectionism. It's chronic, the chronic self-hatred in the face of that, and the power of the Brahma Viharas, really the power of them to cut through all this damage we do to ourselves and others through that lack of appreciation of our goodness and focusing on our goodness. Most people I know do not focus on their goodness; they focus on their faults, and it's so sad, you know. And I'm in the boat too. So I know the conditioning. I know it's so strong. So any time that you have one moment of loving kindness for yourself, never mind others, it's such a huge achievement. Genuine, where it's unconditional. This unconditional kindness of care, appreciation, equanimity, and then peace. Anytime there's a moment of peace, we just want it to be permanent. And that's just being caught in the future. It's a fantasy, right? It's not it has nothing based on reality. What can be real is a moment when we can go, oh, it's okay. It's okay. It's like even that much, it's okay. It's okay to be where I am. It's okay. It's so important. So if you're down on yourself, think good breaking. Breaking meaning you're not pounding yourself with self-hatred. You stop it, stop it, break it, stop it. Cut that whip, like it just anytime you can do it, it actually helps the whole planet. You're a part of the earth. If you get you're part of the earth, you would never treat something you love like that. So you're worthy, Luca, of a lot of love. Yeah, as we all are. To sum it up, that's our work. That's part of our work.
Well, thank you everyone for gathering again on another Sunday in the summer. We look forward to seeing you next Sunday if you're available. Yeah. Well, until then, take good care.
Aloha.